So hello and welcome back to Go Again Gaming. My name is Az, and today we're going to be looking at if dual classes or dual sort of characters will be bad for the game of Flesh and Blood or good for the game of Flesh and Blood. So this is mainly just a question that I am posing to you as a viewer, as a player of Flesh and Blood, and as a player of the new Monarch set, because Monarch is the first instance we've had of this topic. And I'm speaking about the dual classes. We got the Light Warrior and the Light Illusionist. So we got Boltyn and Prism. And then we have the Shadow Brute in Levia, and the Shadow Runeblade in Chain. So historically, we've had Runeblades, we've had Brutes, we've had Warriors. We haven't had an Illusionist yet, but these characters are dual classes effectively, because in this set you also have light cards and shadow cards. So basically you could use all of the catalogue of the brutes, but all of the catalogue of the shadow cards if you were to choose Levia. Is that a good thing? Does Levia basically just push aside Rhinar simply because she can use shadow cards and Rhinar can't? That is the question that I'm posing to you. So will the dual classes make the other classes redundant if this continues to happen? So if they bring out Fire Warrior or Ice Ninja, will the other warriors or ninjas that are just the bland versions of these characters be pushed aside for the new flashy dual class type characters? That is the question that I'm asking to you now. Is there any point in using the older heroes that came out with the game when it first started? Is it worth using those legacy characters anymore? Why be a plain warrior like Dorinthia when you can have both light and warrior cards with Boltyn? So that's the question I'm asking. Is it worth it? Or is it good for the game to have these dual classes? I think it's okay, because ultimately your hero card that you choose, so your character, your hero, that hero's abilities determine the deck style or the deck build that you make, because ultimately your hero will say this does this if you achieve this, or something along the lines of that. Your hero will determine your deck type, right? You may have multiple different rangers, or you might have a shadow ranger or something, but they're going to care about the smattering of ranger cards and shadow cards and anything else that appears in the set that they're from, like the Shadow Brutes and the Light Warriors and what have you. All of this Monarch set is basically the dark versus the light, and it's going to incorporate a lot of mechanics from that set to do with those characters. So it's not really going to influence the older characters. So I think ultimately, with regards to the characters, the decks that you can make, I think the most important thing to note is the fact that your deck is going to be built on your character. So if you were to use Levia, which is the Shadow Brute, you probably won't want to use Rhinar's cards as much, because they're not going to be synergizing, because they don't care about Shadow. But that can be an issue in itself. So that's what I mean. I'm asking you the question here, as a very, very new player of the game. What do you think? You've been playing longer than me. Is this a good idea? So I'm just looking at my notes here that I've made for this video. So I think that the dual classes are just down to the set that's released. So like obviously Magic the Gathering and other games, it's based on certain mechanics or themes that are being fleshed out in that particular set. So obviously Monarch is very much light versus shadow. So I think that's why they decided to have a mixture of classes like Light Warrior, Light Illusionist, Shadow Brute, Shadow Runeblade. Because you can't just introduce light and shadow in a set, because no characters can use light or shadow cards. So you do have to sort of bring out those characters that can use those cards in their decks and ultimately fuel the new sets, right? because it's always going to be an expanding game. There's always going to be more classes, more sort of subclasses, or extra sort of themes tacked on there, like light and shadow, or fire and ice, and what have you. So there's going to be a lot more, I think, in the game. But is it going to be good for the game? Is it going to push out the older characters for the sake of new ones? So that's the main sort of topic and theme that I'm going for here. But I think it's good because obviously it allows new, fresh, and interesting flavors into the game. So obviously this whole light and shadow thing, it's interesting because you can be a warrior, but you can have a splattering of light cards in there as well, which care about sort of imbuing you into your soul and what have you. So yeah, I think it's going to be interesting to see where they go with dual classes, because obviously the older classes are going to be left behind ultimately if they're not sort of supported. But I think a good way to sort of maybe tackle multi-classing could be, I could be completely wrong here, but you could have like equipments and items or other things that you could potentially allow you to spec into other classes or elements. So for instance, if you wore a rogue cloak, it allows you to play rogue cards in your deck. I know there isn't a rogue at the moment, but certain sort of equipments maybe that you can equip to your hero prior to the game, which allows you to use the deck that you've built around a multi-class. So maybe there's something like that along those lines there, where you've got in a sort of supplementary set like Crucible of War, you've got a load of cards in there which allow you to spec into other classes that you might have collected for other sets and what have you. So that could be an answer. Or there could be sort of like a pre-game discussion or pre-game mechanic that allows you to use cards from other classes, but only limited to 2. Or some sort of metagame discussion which allows you and your friends to play at a table where you want to be a brute ninja or what have you. There isn't really going to be any synergies there between sort of multi-classes, but it just gives you a way of experimenting with different classes and doing different things. So I think very much at the moment they're putting light and shadow cards in there, but that's only because the light and shadow cards work with the characters that they've released for that set. So if in the future, I don't know whether Levia, Boltyn, Prism, or Chain are going to be supported, because they care about both the Levia, for instance, cares about both the brute cards and the shadow cards. So if we don't get any more shadow brute cards, because there's shadow brute cards, so you have to be a shadow brute in order to use them. So is this the only time when we're going to get support for these characters? That's the other bad thing about making dual class characters and then also giving them cards that are obviously meant for them. Is do we see support for Levia in the future? Because she has access to shadow cards, brute cards, and shadow brute cards. So are we ever going to get more shadow brute cards now? So yeah, that's the dangers of dual classes, I think. But I do think it's okay at the moment, because your deck is very much built on the character that you select. So the character that you select obviously synergizes with certain cards and certain builds, and you obviously can experiment with that to see how you want your deck to run best. But ultimately, the character that you choose will determine the sort of cards that you play. And if you want to play a ninja, for instance, you're not going to want to include Shadow Brute cards in there, even if you could. I don't think. So it's going to be interesting to see where they take dual classes, but I'd love to see what your thoughts are in the comments with regards to the future of dual classes or multi-classes. But I think that in general, multi-classing won't be beneficial unless your specific hero has a benefit from doing it. So Levia, Chain, Prism, and Boltyn will obviously care about both of the cards that they're associated with. Whereas characters in the past, if you were to have a multi-class ability on there, they probably won't matter, because you want to build based on what their card is and what they want to do as a character. So I think it's not going to hurt us that much, I don't think, but I'd like to see what your thoughts are, because you have been playing the game for longer than me. And to be honest, you've played the game. I haven't played the game yet. I haven't got any product yet at all. I'm going to be getting some next week, or the week after. So make sure you hit the like and subscribe button, hit the little bell notification if you want to be notified of any future videos. I will be doing some product openings soon on the channel, and I will also be delving into the Arcane Rising heroes and how to play those and the lore surrounding those as well soon, this week or over the next week. So thank you very much for tuning in, and we will see you on the next one. I have been Az. Peace.